Well, this is Christian Husband Game 101, making her feel loved. Because we know it's the feels before the reels with the wife. Making her feel loved. How do we do that? Pastor Dalrock wrote a really good article about his wife feeling unloved. And so he starts off saying there are a couple of unfair criticisms of game, which he sees fairly regularly. The first is the idea that what game teaches is painfully obvious, and that game goes against the programming men are given today. Here's what one writer says: most men who came of age in the 1980s and 90s were not learning these things about being attractive to women. Most were not taught any of these things as far as what game teaches in being attractive to women. Since he was taught that there are absolutely no differences whatsoever between women and men with their thought patterns, perceptions, the way they experience events, the way they process information, the way they process their feelings. We are all equal, is what we'd been taught in the 80s and 90s. He says he was taught that any man who pursues a woman aggressively or goes after what he wants is a pig, a chauvinist, and probably a criminal. So I was taught that a woman would really find a soft, caring, good-hearted, kind, nice man attractive, very attractive. He said he was taught never, never, never to escalate sexually without express permission, and that doing otherwise would subject him to possible criminal prosecution. He said he was taught that a woman's thought processes are never to be challenged. He was taught that a woman's feelings are paramount and that you must do everything possible to make your woman happy and feel good. He was taught that any man who challenged a woman is an aggressor and is probably physically violent and is overbearing and domineering. He was taught if his woman was unhappy, it was because he was not being nice enough to her. It was because he wasn't doing enough for her, or it was him not being sensitive enough to her needs, wants, and feelings. But of course we know that women don't really like men who follow all those rules that we've been taught to be nice boys, blah, 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 blah. But we somehow still follow all the polite rules, wanting to please our wives and other women in our lives, and so we follow the bad advice. But once we understand why the advice is so terrible, it's painfully obvious why it's wrong. And so that is why we need to learn some game. Need to learn some game. Now he says the other unfair indictment against game, which he sees fairly regularly, is that it teaches men not to love women. He says one blogger talks about this. This is a quote from this blogger. When we realize that true eros, meaning, love, the erotic love, romantic love, eros desires an I-thou union, we see that game is actually hostile to eros because it teaches the man to regard his partner as an it to be manipulated rather than a thou to be communicated with. I thought about it, I was like, man, I don't want to talk to my wife in a thou. You thou myest woman, blah, 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 whatever. Like, that sounds stupid. Anyway. And so Pastor Dalrock writes, he's been married to his wife for over a decade and a half now, and he's grown so close over the years that friends and relatives often tease that they're really one entity. Even so, there have been many times when his marriage has been under strain. Even at its worst, it's never been the kind of truly difficult marriage that he often reads about. But he describes the first difficult period came fairly early in his marriage to his wife. His wife was still in school, and he had slipped into a more beta frame. He says the combination of his increased beta-ness and her being surrounded by other men at school created strain on the marriage. She fitness tested him. Now, we've talked about fitness tests in another Christian Husband Game 101. That his wife fitness tested him with some regularity, and while he generally passed the fitness test, he always didn't come through with flying colors. During this period, he says his wife actually figured out part of what was going on. She would lay into him for something trivial, and after a period of time trying to placate her, Dalrock would eventually find something else to do, which was away from her. Says his thought process wasn't to try to game her, but he figured why hang around his apartment for the weekend to get nagged at all weekend when he could be hunting or fishing instead. He said on the weekends where she wasn't testing me, we were very close, and then he would stick around. At some point, she would test again, and I'd be out the door with a gun or a fishing rod going hunting or fishing. And so his wife figured out the pattern at some point, and she came to him about it, and she said she would get into a mood where she felt absolutely compelled to tick him off. Every cell in her body was telling her that she would be better if she only provoked a fight with him. Now, isn't that interesting? His wife figured this out. It was just like something within her just thought she needed to do this. So when she did it, then he would be out the door going hunting or fishing. Once the fight was started, but especially once he had left, she felt miserable then. And so she made conscious effort not to give in to the urge. He says that they fought less and as a result spent much more time together. And he said after that, things improved and they had a normal, very good actually marriage. But for the first 7 of the last 10 years that Dalrock's been married to his wife, she started telling him that she didn't feel loved. Now, this is a good subject. I hear this from a lot of friends, how if they're honest, their wives, or wife, not wives, I don't have any friends with multiple wives, their wife will tell them something like that. I just don't feel like you love me. I don't feel, because it's the feels before reals. Now, I've heard it said that for men, love is an action. It's, I did this, that means I love you. Or you did this for me, that means you love me. But for women, love is a feeling. Love is how I feel. It's not an action. It doesn't matter if you did X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D. That doesn't matter. That's not how a woman knows you love her. She knows you love her by the way she feels. Do I feel like I love you? Love is not a verb. Anyway, back to the story. Dalrock's wife says she didn't feel that he loved her for the first 7 years of their marriage. He says this was maddening to him because no matter what he tried, it didn't help. He knew enough about game intuitively to not go overboard on the flowers and cards and etc. But he says when he surprised her with those things, it still didn't help. He said she's a natural leader, so he tried letting her make more decisions. Anytime an opportunity came up, he would make a point to defer to her preference to show her that he loved her, but this only made the problem worse. Ooh, now that's an interesting thing. Doing that, you think it would make it better. Letting her make decisions, deferring to her judgment, blah, 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 blah. Pastor Dalrock noticed this makes things worse. Take note of that, gentlemen. That made things worse. He says it makes things worse, but he didn't make the connection at the time. This wasn't an acute problem, but it was a chronic one, and he hated it when she brought it up because he felt like there was nothing he could do to make her happier. She knew that he loved her, but she didn't feel it in the way that she wanted to. She wanted to feel the love. And he says it was, of course, equally frustrating for her as well because she kept telling me something was wrong, and he wasn't making it better. And as Chris Rock says, hey, try your best to make your woman happy, but what nobody ever tells you is you can't make a woman happy. You can't do it. Try your best, but you can't do it. Rock says, I haven't met a happy woman yet. Anyway, that's just jokes. It's just jokes. All right. He says, Dalrock says about 2 years ago, he stumbled on Royce's site. He knew some of game informally, and having watched his natural PUA roommate in college, he learned some of, about it by observation, but he hadn't learned any of the theory. He says what he had put into practice when he met his wife he had mostly lost in an effort to make his wife feel more loved. He was trying so hard to make her feel loved and becoming a beta male instead. It says Royce was extremely painful to read. He kept finding himself wanting to unknow what he had just explained, but he couldn't stop himself from reading more of this man, Royce. It says his curiosity was more intense than his desire to hold on to pretty lies. And after about 4 months of reading Royce in the comments, he had a rudimentary sense of how game worked and started experimenting on his wife. And this is key. She didn't know that he was experimenting, and she didn't know that he was reading these things. And Christian husband, don't tell your wife you've been reading these things and that you've been watching. Don't even tell her you've been watching my channel, okay? Man, I got my one friend, he's banned from even coming to my house because he's been talking to me, listening to me, and his wife cut him off. You can't even go over there anymore. So don't even bring it up. They don't even need to know, okay? They don't need to know. Funny. He says that he stopped sending her the frequent I love you texts throughout the day in an effort to make her feel more loved. Instead, he started shooting for upped attraction. He's trying to up the attraction ante. He says he started objectifying his wife a little more and treating her like a possession. Ooh, boy, you don't hear that. I'm not going to hear that in church. I love you was out. Come here, woman was in. Instead of gentle, loving hugs, he'd forcefully grab his wife and pull her into him and mischievously cop a feel from time to time as well. That's funny. But he says it wasn't his actions that just changed or the words. His frame changed as well. Had he tried the same thing from his older, more beta frame, it would have most likely backfired. Dalrock says he struggles to define it, but his frame was more of a playful, cocky, funny one. I think I've talked about that too, cocky, funny frame. And the results of this was more attraction from his wife. She was more attracted to him. And he could notice a real difference in the response to him. Now, this is really profound. Something started happening. She thanked him for finally making her feel more loved. This was by practicing the tenets of game on his wife. Now, isn't that interesting? So he says with the more attraction to him, he had inadvertently filled that nagging void which she had been feeling for so many years, feeling unloved. Wow, there it is. He says this was a huge breakthrough for him. He's learned more about game, and he's also able to mix in more of the comfort beta traits with it. So give her a little comfort, give her a little attraction. It's the game method. Says he still tells his wife he loves her and he surprises her with flowers from time to time, but he also teases her and makes sure she knows she is my woman. And they're both happier. Game has truly done incredible things for the marriage, according to Pastor Dalrock. Now that's interesting. Hey, give me a comment below on this if anybody's experienced this. Like, subscribe. Let me know what you think of this. This is interesting. I thought this was really interesting stuff. I'll put a post where a link to this article here. And I think that'll maybe help a few more of us that are way too beta become more alpha, be winners in our marriage. And also, someone else who's winning that I need to mention is that Christ is winning. He is building his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Until next time, this is the PostMillennial Man.